On today's podcast, we have music industry attorney and artist advocate Ned Menoyo. We talk about his work with independent artists. We talk about the scene today, the music industry. We talk about contracts. We talk about what you as an independent artist need to look out for, especially with independent labels. We also talk about when do you need a music attorney and much, much more. Insiders, are you ready? Welcome to MUBUTV's Insider Podcast, where our mission is to educate, empower, and engage artists and music business professionals who are dedicated to having a successful career in the new music industry. Here are your hosts, Ritch, Esra, and Eric Knight.
Welcome back, Insiders, to another episode of the MUBUTV Insider Podcast, where our mission is to educate, empower, and engage your music career. On today's episode, we sat down and spoke with music attorney Ned Menoyo about his work with independent artists. When do you need an attorney? How important are they to building your team? The biggest mistakes he sees new artists making, what to look out for independent record deals, and much, much more. You won't want to miss it. But first, a word from our sponsor. Hey Insiders, are you looking to take your music career to the next level? Then you need to know about the Music Business Registry. The Music Business Registry is the leading music industry publisher of the most up-to-date contact information for major and independent record label A&R, music publishers, artist managers, music attorneys, music supervisors, and much, much more. The Music Business Registry is the trusted industry standard and source, serving the music business community for over 28 years with the most accurate and up-to-date contact information available. Their titles include the A&R Registry, the Film and Television Music Monthly, the Music Publisher Registry, and the Music Attorney Registry. All of their publications are available in print, PDF, CSV, or online subscription. Visit them now at musicregistry.com and receive a 10% discount by using coupon code MUBUTV10 at checkout. That's musicregistry.com, coupon code MUBUTV10. When you're ready to put your music to work, musicregistry.com.
Welcome back, Insiders. This week's featured interview is with music attorney Ned Menoyo. We had a really good conversation with Ned. You know, Ned is somebody who works with a lot of new artists, and we had that conversation about, not only the landscape of today, but about, a lot of important things that new artists need to be aware of. Like, when should you seek the services of a music attorney? And I think Ned had a different perspective on that than perhaps other attorneys do. The importance of your team. Right. Of an artist team. The biggest mistakes that he sees new artists making. And one of the more interesting things I thought in this conversation is the whole element of when he discussed the most crucial elements in recording agreements today, especially with smaller independent labels. He really broke down a lot of the things that you want to be looking out for, that just because a label offers you a deal, it's the fine print and the nuances that you want to be very, very careful when signing those things. And he made that distinction because he said, with the big labels, you can kind of know exactly what you're getting into. But a lot of times with the smaller labels, you need to do some more investigation. So he had a lot of good pieces of advice and really solid things for artists who are developing careers.
Absolutely. And teeing off one of your other points that you had mentioned earlier, I thought what was very interesting about his interview, which was a different twist that I'd never heard before, and his explanation for it, which he thought, and after he said it, I was sold on it, which was the idea of that the attorney should be the very first team member that you should have. I thought that was really, really interesting, and hearing his perspective on why that is. And so, that, and then, obviously the timing, because he kind of came into the business during a transitional period where it was from the copy model going into the access model. So that was a big change that he just happened to be thrown into. So, a lot of really interesting points. And Ned, I know, is a good friend of yours, great guy, and I'm really, really excited for our listeners to listen to this episode.
I am too. I think they're going to get a lot of benefit and a lot of, good information from it as well.
So Insiders, with that, sit back, relax, and enjoy our featured interview with Ned Menoyo.
Ned, thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate it.
It's my pleasure, Ritch.
You didn't start out in the music business. I was wondering, can you tell us about your background and journey into the music business?
Absolutely. I come from a very musical family. My mother's family is Irish, and there's always was a lot of music in the family. And it was just something that everybody did. One of my uncles is actually an Irish folk musician professionally, and another one's a very good piano player turned blues harmonica player. So music was just always around, and I always played music growing up. I was in bands. I learned guitar at a young age, but I never actually wanted to be a musician, really. And I did pursue acting professionally, and I got trained up as an actor at NYU for college, but quickly learned that I really had other callings, and I went to law school wanting to kind of get into the nitty-gritty of life, like how things work, just kind of the gears of how things operate. I also come from a family of lawyers, so that kind of came naturally to me. And over a long period of time, I became a trial lawyer on one hand. I went to law school at Northeastern University in Boston, and I became a prosecutor in Boston itself. I worked in the Dorchester District Court doing gang prosecution and just general inner city prosecution. Then I became a civil litigator. Then I moved to the state of Maine, where I got into personal injury law and more trial law. I was also involved in politics and all that. I also became a prosecutor in Cumberland County, Maine for domestic violence for 3 years. So I kind of had a very much like a traditional legal career happening, but at the same time, I played music the whole way, and I had almost two sides of myself. So I'd be a lawyer during the day, I'd be out playing music at night, and I tried to do it at the best level I could. But it wasn't until I started my own practice and I was kicking around for what would my practice look like after I passed the bar here in California, moved to California. I was working at a downtown law firm doing intellectual property litigation and passed my own passed the bar, started a practice. And because I'd had so much involvement in acting and film production and things like that over the years as well, friends said I should try entertainment law. And I also knew all these musicians from playing music here in California and Los Angeles as well after I moved here. And then I read Don Passman's book, All You Need to Know About the Music Business. And when the section came up about music attorney, I just literally knew as soon as I read the first two paragraphs of that, I was like, that's what I want to do. And I love it because you're almost an agent, a manager, and a lawyer wrapped up into one thing. So it allows me to be creative for my clients in a business way, like while they're being creative musically and making great music and writing songs. And so I decided, like, I wanted to protect my friends, because it's always those first contracts that hang an artist up. You know, the ones that someone signs on the hood of a car, you know, outside a club that then they can't get out of for 20 years. And I thought to myself, I know all these great musicians here in Los Angeles that I can help them prevent making that first mistake, and also try to help them get ahead in the business whatever way I can. And then I was fortunate enough to meet Don Passman, and I'm happy to say that he quickly kind of became a mentor to me. And I'm in contact with him quite a bit. And it was about the luckiest thing that happened to me when he kind of took me under his wing a little bit. And I know he does with other people as well. I'm not special in that regard, but it was quite lucky. And I really, really love this role that I found for myself in this very, you know, I would say special business. It's a kind of an incredible place to be working.
Now, you got into the music business in a very interesting and somewhat tumultuous time, in that we were, you know, economically transitioning from the copy model over to the access model of streaming, which we're at now. What were your impressions of the music industry when you started out?
It was also it was still very much unsettled then. And now things have settled into streaming as the primary delivery vehicle for music. But I'm really interested in terms of how new technologies will also affect where it goes from here. And I think that while the major labels are kind of making hay while the sun shines with streaming, they're, you know, collecting lots of money off of Spotify. They've all sold most of their stakes in Spotify, so they've kind of cashed out of that. Spotify has gone public. Universal Music is now for sale. It seems like, you know, there was that massive, I think it's the nadir when it's at the lowest point. And now everything's on the upswing. People are making money. I mean, especially Universal, for example, making, I think, $1 billion last year. I may be making that up, but a lot of money. And, but I think, like, there's a lot more change to come. I'm not at all convinced that we're going to be here for any really long period of time. On the other hand, because of new technologies that we don't even quite know yet are coming. Just like technology has always changed the music business, from LPs to CDs to streaming. And so something else will be coming. And I think the good news for people like my clients who are 95% independent musicians is that whatever new technology is almost certainly going to benefit them. It's going to, if anything, blockchain, people talk about being direct from the artist to the consumer with almost like a payment per listen directly from the consumer to the artist or something of that nature. I guess is technologically possible. I'm not a tech person, but things of that nature. Streaming services even now are changing to become more and more accessible for the artists. Like DistroKid is a fabulous, distribution company, and they're constantly innovating. They have one thing now where you can actually do a cover song, and in the old days you'd have to go through Harry Fox to get the mechanical royalties paid to whoever was a songwriter, and that would be very cumbersome. You'd have to kind of guess at how many copies you were going to do, and then prepay the fee, prepay the license to the songwriter, and it could be $200. Any amount of money to an independent musician might be cost prohibitive, like that they have to put on top of an actual distribution fee. Well, DistroKid now is just doing this thing where you just pay them like $10 or $20, and they just peel off that the mechanical royalty right off to the songwriter as the money comes in, which makes perfect sense. And they're also doing things like splitting the money that comes in between any of the stakeholders in the song, so that the independent artist doesn't have to actually account to say their producer who they're going to give 20% to, or the other co-performer on the song that they were going to give 10% to. It just is splitting right at the root of the payment by the company, which I think is great. And I mean, there's just all kinds of things happening like that all the time. And I think it's creating an environment where we're really starting to see people thrive. And some people are just bypassing the entire label system altogether and having amazing careers. Wolfpack is one, the band, Lauv, the artist Lauv. People who are doing they're having full-on legit careers that any one of Wolfpack is selling out Madison Square Garden this fall. And Lauv, I know, is on a tour of Asia right now, big venue. So, he has no label. So it's kind of an incredible time, actually. To me, it's very exciting.
Can you talk to the fact of, is there a change? Have you noticed a change in what is expected of an artist? I mean, do they have to be at a certain level of development, be like a Lauv or these other examples that you're giving, to be independent in order to get attention today? Is there more expected from talent today than there was in the past?
Probably, because I think there's almost no opportunity for an A&R person to go out and find someone from a label now and break them. I think those days may be gone. I think you have to, even for a label to be interested in you, you have to have basically a following. You have to almost be an established artist already to have major or big indie major, a big indie A&R person come find you. In terms of the independent people, I'm not sure you have to be better now than you used to have to be. I think if you look back at music through the decades, music has always been kind of amazing. Going back to the 50s, 40s, people have been really very, very good at what they did. But I think to make it today, that you need to be great. To really, there is so much good out there. There's so much good music, which is awesome if you like music. I love going out to see music, and I'm happy. 90% of the time I go see live music now, I'm actually quite happy. It's good stuff. But to make it, to really make it like Lauv, or to make it really big like Wolfpack, you need to either find your niche like Wolfpack did, or be a perfect songwriter like Lauv did to get that attention, or be otherwise exceptional, like something different, something people haven't heard. So when I'm working with my artists, I'm always encouraging originality. I'm always encouraging people to look deep into their hearts and to sing the words that they need to say, and to sing the music that they hear, that only they hear. And because there's so much very good, that you need to be great and original at the same time, in my opinion, in order to break through.
Yeah, that's a great point. I definitely agree 100%. Ned, how did you begin to build your practice?
The best image is that I was like a chicken scratching at bare dirt in a barnyard in the middle of the country someplace or something where there was no water during the Dust Bowl. Really, I mean, actually, you were one of my most important first conversations, Rich, if I can tell you. I mean, I just literally started trying to talk to anybody I could. And since you know everybody, that was a great person. You were a great person to talk to. And just to get my bearings. I mean, I always feel like anything can be done if you kind of set your mind to it and learn everything you can about an industry. I just started reading Billboard every day, reading every book I could about music business and especially music law. And as I read my second, third, fourth book, as I read Billboard every single day and, the other publications, Music Business Worldwide and all those, I just I started to get my own sense of and kind of incorporating that in my past experience as a lawyer and as someone who'd worked in politics, kind of gave me a frame of reference for the industry. And then I really just hit the clubs very hard. And I still go see as much live music as I have the energy to do. In the early days, in the first couple of years, so I've been at the 3 years of just solid music law. I just see as much as I can. In the old days, I didn't take a break. When I was tired, I would go see maybe 4 nights of music a week. And that can get quite tiring. And at first, I didn't know anybody. I would go to, say, school night at Bardot, which is a thing in LA here. That's an industry showcase. I'd go there, know nobody. I don't think I knew anybody there for about a year of going almost every week. Yeah, so it was kind of a lonely thing. I would almost like play games with myself, like let's pretend I'm somebody people should know. You know what I mean?
Right.
Just in my mind, I'd be like, I'm gonna pretend tonight that people actually want to meet me. Like I'm somebody. And now it's kind of come to fruition a little bit where I'll be at school night now. I'll have 2 or 3 clients in attendance. I'll know about 6 or 7 other people, and then maybe somebody will even come up to me, recognize me from Instagram or recognize my license plate, which is Song Law. They'll be like, "Oh, I saw your car in the yard, man," or whatever, and they'll be like, "I want to meet you, man," or something. And so that's like really full circle for me, but because it was a long time. It was 1 to 2 years of really just trying to find a network and getting to know people. And now I've got there are people, I have bands that I don't represent, but I'm a fan of, who I'll just go catch every show they do, or friends. Almost like there's a really amazing music community in Los Angeles, especially in the independent world. I mean, it's kind of like special, I have to say. Like I don't know other cities now, but I've never seen any kind of group of. There's a bit of a movement, truthfully, and I think it goes hand in glove with the overall artistic movement in Los Angeles, which is really on the upswing with all the murals and street art and great artists that have moved to the city. But the music scene is, vibrant. Wouldn't even begin to cover what it feels like right now. But I know there's other great cities like Brooklyn and Seattle, and even I have a client from Cincinnati. Cleveland. They would kill me if they knew I said that. From Cleveland. Although I just have a new client who lives right outside of Cincinnati. But amazing music being made everywhere now. But in terms of being able to go out every night and see someone play music, this city's great for that for me.
Oh yeah, absolutely. When should an artist or a band or any kind of client seek the advice and counsel of an attorney? Part 1, and part 2, can you talk about what they should look for in a good attorney to represent them if they're going to be doing that? Yeah,
definitely. I think bands wait too long quite often. I'm often, although it's gotten better as people kind of get kind of wise to people have gotten wise to the need for a lawyer sooner. I think it should be their first team member. And when an artist is coming up, they don't often think about the fact that one day they're going to have a team, and the team is going to be a lawyer, a manager, a booking agent, possibly a label, PR people. And I think like the lawyer, to me, I'm biased, but the lawyer should be the first one. First off, we're the cheapest of all of them. So like in terms of percentages, we're generally at 5% of someone's earnings. Now, if an artist isn't making any money, a lawyer might charge them something on top of that, because 5% of nothing is nothing. And as I learned from personal experience, you cannot eat anything with nothing. But a lawyer is a great first thing. And here's the most important reason why. Is the lawyer out of all of those people is the only one that owes the artist a fiduciary duty under the bar rules of, say, California or New York or whatever state they're in. A fiduciary duty, every lawyer owes every client, countrywide, worldwide probably, but countrywide certainly in the United States, a fiduciary duty. That means that lawyer has to put your interests above their own, has to, or they could get in trouble with the bar and lose their law license. So if my client has an opportunity there's a fancy legal word called usurp. If I usurp that opportunity, if I take that opportunity for myself and I don't like maximize it on behalf of my client, get them the best deal I can get, then I'd be violating that fiduciary duty. Now, a manager doesn't have it. Now, tons of managers, and in fact, I think all the managers I personally know are very honorable, ethical people. But I mean, history is kind of strewn with circumstances of managers and artists getting into squabbles with each other, or managers having stolen money or whatever from an artist and put their own interests above the artist. So I'm not saying every lawyer is ethical or whatever, but I am saying that they are bound by that duty under the bar rules. So you actually have someone to go complain to. With a manager, there's no one to complain to. You'd have to sue them. But there's always a state bar that regulates the lawyer. So you have someone to complain to. In terms of when to do it, and so why is that important as well? Because a lawyer will look at, so say you want to have a manager or managers reaching out to you, a lawyer will help you negotiate that agreement with the manager, make sure that it's a fair deal for you. Because some stock management contracts that are in the back of like legal form books are actually very skewed toward the manager and against the artist, and they don't have to be. Everything's always negotiable. So every term in a management contract is also negotiable. And an artist without a legal representation may not be aware of that. Certainly before they ever sign any contract, like any contract. I mean any like sync licensing contract, certainly any record label contract, any kind of publishing contract, they really need to have a lawyer look at it. And it's sad to say, but almost more importantly, if it's an indie company, you might think that like a small label would have even one run by fantastic people, would have a good contract for an artist, but those have actually been the worst contracts for artists that I've seen, partly because they're not as well written as the major label contracts. The major label contracts are pretty tough. I mean, you can't really, there's not a lot in there to like argue about. You might argue about one thing here or one thing there, but the indie contracts they're kind of, sometimes they're all over the place, or they might be a publishing contract and a record label a recording contract in one document. And that's like having I'm going to buy a car and buy a house in the same document. They're different things altogether with different purposes and income streams and everything. So they shouldn't be intertwined in the same set of words on a paper. What to look for in a lawyer, I actually think the number one most important thing, especially in entertainment law and music in particular, is someone that you like, someone that you want to talk to, someone you want to go have a cup of coffee with, someone that when they call you, you want to talk to them, because it's a very close relationship. I at this point in my career, I only take people who I like, not just whose music I like or who I think might do great, but people who I like, who I want to help, and who I think are going to appreciate what I'm doing for them. To me, that's like almost the number one most important thing, because you're really working very, very closely with your lawyer. It's a different relationship than if you hire a lawyer to do a trial, you get in a car accident, or you've been charged with a crime and you need a lawyer, or you're buying a house. Those are kind of like just about that one moment in your life, just about buying the house, just about just about getting you out of the trouble with the police or the divorce or whatever it is. But the music lawyer they're part of your team. And like, you better like them. And also on the flip side of that, like, make sure they like your music, like they make sure that they're excited about what you're doing, because it's just and this is kind of the artist in me, is like, I know what it's like when someone's excited about my music versus when they're not. And when someone's excited about, say, music I've made, it just gives me energy. When I can feel a genuine, authentic, like, enthusiasm for what I've done, it's like, wow, that felt good to just talk to that person. And I think the more times an artist surrounds people with people who are actually excited about what they're doing, especially an artist, because it's such an emotional job. You're dealing with emotions as part of your work. And also the business is just very emotional. It's an ups and downs kind of business. So someone who, like, is on the same wavelength as you as a person, and also in terms of music, I think is good. Obviously someone who does music law too. And I know there are lots of other music lawyers. I don't know that many of them personally, but there are, because I'm mostly dealing with companies and labels and that kind of thing. But certainly there are a lot of them. And I would say that anyone who kind of has at least a few clients that are just for music is probably qualified to help. And because it's very different from even other types of entertainment law. I started as an entertainment lawyer wanting to do film, TV, and music. But I quickly, like, cut away the film and TV because I realized it was just wasn't at all a similar kind of thing to do. And I wanted to be good at one thing. So if someone's doing a lot of music law, that's usually a good indicator. But definitely not like your aunt who's a real estate lawyer. That's almost worse than no lawyer at all, because they might give you a false sense of security. There are things in contracts I call magic words, and they just have special meaning. And someone not working in entertainment or music wouldn't know what those magic words are necessarily.
Hey, Insiders, we hope that you're enjoying our featured interview. Before we dive back in, a word from our sponsor. So, hey, Ritch, tell me a little bit about the Music Business Registry.
Well, what we are, Music Business Registry is the leading contact directory. We publish all of the most current, accurate, and up-to-date contact information for the music industry. We do directories for A&R. We do directories for music publishers. We do directories for film and television music. We do directories of artist managers, and we do directories of music attorneys. And we also sell other publications too, like the Indie Bible Series, the YouTube Bible Series, the Indie Spotify Bible Series, and other things as well. That's what we're about.
So if I wanted to find out, let's say, the music supervisor for American Horror Story, I can kind of go into the Film and TV monthly and find the information that I need there?
Well, we don't list specific shows. What we do list is if you know who the music supervisor is, and you can find that out on IMDb, then you can find their contact information. And we have that in our Film and Television Music Monthly. Absolutely, yes.
That's great. And I hear that we have a discount right now. If you go to musicregistry.com and use coupon code MUBUTV10 at checkout, you'll receive 10% off your first order.
That's absolutely correct. Yeah, we offer that to all of the MUBUTV insiders.
So insiders, check out musicregistry.com and use MUBUTV10 as your coupon code.
I'm curious, do you find that artists, in your experience, since you've been doing this, working with talent, do you find that artists and bands today are a little more savvy or knowledgeable about their careers than when you started out with regards to this conversation?
Absolutely. There's so much information available nowadays through, publications, through, like registries like your registry, Ritch, and the A&R registry. Even you always have an article every month about something. There's a tremendous amount of Don Passman's book is in its 10th edition about. There's so much information available online, and so artists are quite savvier, I would say. Yes. When you look back and you hear about Tom Petty, losing all the publishing rights to his first record, and the trials and tribulations that Prince had, Bruce Springsteen, and you think, wow. If you think before there was an internet, that there just was nowhere to go look and find this stuff. But you can go to CD Baby, you can go to TuneCore, you can go to any site right now and almost get a primer on everything. And I recommend people, I mean, I definitely recommend everybody reads Don Passman's book. I mean, to me, that's like required reading. And there's two levels in that book. There's the artist kind of track and then the professional, track. And I would say just skim, do the artist track, but you can go to anything online and find the information. No question about it, they're savvier. And it's kind of like creating a cool environment where, deals are maybe faster to come around, and especially people are trying new things. Like people are starting labels of their own, which is amazing, and probably feeling empowered to do that. Artists are starting their own labels. New models are being kind of created every day. And I think that's hand in glove with what you're just asking about.
Absolutely. And I think the Don Passman book is the holy grail.
Yeah.
That's required reading for anybody that wants to start off in the music industry. Let me ask you, Ned, given the landscape of the culture today with DSPs, social media, live events, video content, and other platforms, do labels and publishers today expect artists to be more developed to a certain extent, like online social media, streaming numbers, live attendance, before they're even interested in them?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that's to me, that's like my most frustrating aspect of what I'm trying to do. Because part of what I try to do is introduce artists to labels and publishing companies, all that. But there seems to be like a certain threshold right now of, social media numbers. And I get it. I mean, because the record industry I wasn't around in, the old days, but except as an observer, but it's very corporate now. So all these labels have kind of earnings figures they have to meet. And so they don't really have a grace period for an artist. When they make a release, they want to, not all the time, but they very much want to make a profit right away. Like they want the song that is released to make money right away. And that's pretty rare. I mean, that's like a very rare thing for something to be released on the first shot and have it make money. In my experience, I mean, most of the time it's people are kind of releasing things, promoting them, promoting, recording, and so it's a long process. And I mean, I think here's how I've started to think about it a little differently, Rich. I mean, there's always been that term developing artist. I think developing artists is actually, rather than it being like the bar is lowered, I think the bar for what is a developing artist is getting higher and higher and higher. Like, so I started to classify most people as developing artists, even if they've been doing it for 10 years. Because I'm not talking about their musicality or their songs. I mean, there could be someone walking around with a hit song in their back pocket right now. Like for real, that's going to be a hit song next year. But developing in terms of their brand, their image, their social media stats, their streaming stats, their following, their mailing list, things like that. That's what they need to develop. And so, yes, I mean, you start to get some people with some traction, and then the labels start to come around. And that's, again, not a uniform statement. There are some really cool labels like Red Bull, who goes out. Chris Doritas does some incredible A&R work for them, and they're very selective about who they sign. But it's not uniform. But on the other hand, yeah, I mean, and it's understandable on one level. On the other hand, I think I like the romantic idea of the old A&R model of finding great music and then running with that pony, kind of.
Well, as a follow-up to that, Ned, then let me ask you, is it your experience that, once you get label interest in an artist or in one of your clients, is an artist's team important to them when they're considering signing a new act? And that's part one. And part two is, does that answer differ between majors and independents?
It does differ. Independents care a lot less, but is literally the first question a major will ask you. It literally, who's the team? Do they have a team, and who is it? And I mean, it's hard to get a manager. It's hard to get a really good manager for an artist. I equate getting a manager to kind of finding a girlfriend or a boyfriend or something. It's like, it's a very big time relationship that I think happens kind of in kismet world. It doesn't happen necessarily like, it's not something that you can kind of like go hire a lawyer. It's much harder to get a manager that's going to fit your career because they're way more involved in your career even than a lawyer is or anybody else. And I think that's the number one thing. I don't think a label really, from what I've seen, a major label, they don't want to really interface directly with an artist. I think they've kind of learned through time that that's there's a reason managers get 20%, and artists are fantastic, amazing people. But one of the reasons they get 20% is and it's called manager. If you think about just a term manager, it's somebody who's really trying to keep that artist on track, and artists being given to being like emotional people who are creative. And the manager's trying to make sure that they're able to function in the world of commerce and business. And I think the labels decided a while ago, is my guess, that they just did not have the man or woman power and or time to do that, and energy, because it takes a lot of energy. And so, yeah, you kind of need a manager, I think, before a major will look at you. But independents are much less likely to care. But the major independents, like the big independents, they're definitely going to care. And I think like the more people you have, a lawyer, a manager, if you've hired PR people, I mean, even AWOL will care how much money you're spending on your own promotion. And are you engaged with PR right now? They're more likely to back you, I think, if they see you've committed yourself and your own resources to your output and your content.
Ned, what are the biggest avoidable mistakes you see artists making today?
I think the most important avoidable mistake is when someone's presented with a contract, they see it as like a binary option, like a yes or a no. And so I've heard about stories, I've heard directly from people who have been given contracts in the past. One guy had a contract offered to him by Sony, and he didn't like it, and he didn't have a lawyer look at it for him, or if he did, I don't know what advice he got. But he decided the terms weren't good, and he just said no and walked away, assuming that there would be other contracts. But none came for him. These opportunities don't come very often, the really good ones, if ever again. So my number one thing I'd love to tell people is everything can be negotiated. Like, you can take a bad contract. I had this one very small sync placement contract for a woman that it was a dead no when we first got it. And then we spent 9 months negotiating it, flip-flopped all the terms, in terms of percentages. It went from what they offered as to her 30%, they ended up with 30%, that kind of thing. And eventually we signed it. It took a lot of massaging, but almost any contract, if the parties want to do work together and be in business together, can be negotiated. So I hate it when I hear about people just saying no to something, or the flip side is saying yes to a bad contract. Because, like I said, that can be negotiated too. So if there are terms in there, they really should never sign something where there's a term that they feel uncomfortable about, because they're going to have to live with it. And the same is true for signing something that they don't understand. My dad was a lawyer, and even before I was a lawyer, he would tell me things like, never sign anything you don't understand every word of. And to me, that's an important maxim to live by. And so a big part of my job is literally just translating all this stuff into normal English for people and making sure they actually just even understand what they're signing, because then they know what they're going to have to live with. Once you put your signature on the page, you're bound to it. I mean, that's like a serious thing. It's not like you can't sign a page and then tell a judge later, well, I figured we'd work it out, or they told me something different orally. Well, no. Almost every contract says what's on the page is the contract, and you are legally bound to that document that you've signed and the promises you've made, and the time, especially with regard to artists, the time periods you've agreed to. You could sign a contract for as long as 7 years in California, that kind of thing. And that, for a 21-year-old, that feels like an eternity.
You know what's interesting? I'm listening to you and I'm thinking, we're talking about a lot of artists who have pursued these kinds of deals. I'm curious, because you're on the front lines of this, Ned. Have you seen in your time a lot of artists not pursuing recording and publishing deals? And I'm asking that because you mentioned Lauv, you mentioned all of these options and how other people are, or even the unfortunate situation where that gentleman turned down the deal that Sony offered. Are you seeing more and more of this where people are just going on their own, or are the majority of artists, pursuing label and publishing situations rather than doing it on their own?
It's always the first conversation we have. it's the very first conversation I have with people is what are your goals? And does the label publishing company, a lot of people think like just kind of knee jerk, like I need a record label. And by the way, I mean, it is awesome to get signed to a really good record label. I'm not knocking that at all. It's still an incredible thing that could happen for somebody. But it's not now the only way. So it all depends what kind of what their goals are. If someone wants to be the next Katy Perry, they have to go to a label. Like that, you really are not going to be the next Katy Perry on your own. It's just there's just too much marketing money involved, too much radio promotion involved, and it's almost like, well, okay, we're going to go for labels then. But if someone is like more concerned with, I'm going to have my artistic direction is going to be my thing. I'm going to have all control over, my image, how I look, like what I write about, what I sing about, who I tour with. Then, really it's probably not the case. And probably it's the case that they're better off trying to go for the independent route. So it's always the very first question. I think publishing contracts, in Nashville, it's really different. I think they're different down there. But in LA, I think or in New York, it's kind of something that comes later in an artist's career is when those start to make sense. But early in an artist's career, I mean, aside from the sync placement contracts are very standard and routine. And those can be a very good idea. And even if you're staying independent, because the terms of those have changed since I've been doing this. And I actually saw this change start in Europe with contracts that came out of, say, Amsterdam and England, where the term of the contract would be very limited. It would be, maybe 15 years. We're going to have the right for 15 years to try to place this music with another artist or into a show or an advertisement. And we're not going to take any copyright, and we're going to cut you 60% of the profit. And so those started coming from companies there. I think companies here, like small companies here and mid-sized companies here, have picked up on that in the past, say, 2 years. And those can be really advantageous if the people know what they're doing who are placing the songs.
Let me ask you, Ned, what in your opinion are the most crucial elements of recording agreements that artists and songwriters need to be aware of today?
Absolutely. To me, the term is always the first thing I look at. And the term means the length of the contract. I actually read a contract, a big music company publishing contract the other day, and I could not determine when the contract was going to end. Because there were options, when the first period ended, the two other options would kick in, and they each had the same ending time. And the ending time was based on how many songs were placed with major artists, how many songs got into the top 10. It was like things you can't point to a day on the calendar and say this contract is going to end on this day. I still don't know when this contract could end. And I assume it's a legal contract because it's from a big company. But that would be something I would actually challenge if I represented that person. It wasn't my client, but I would challenge that because I couldn't find the end date. That to me is one of the most troubling things. So term, what you're required to give, an album, what does that mean? Is that 3 songs or 20 songs? How long are the songs? And then a really important concept is at what level are the songs required to be? So commercially satisfactory is a very good word. It's a good set of words, because commercially satisfactory means you and I can differ as to whether it's a good song, but I could hire an expert who could tell me this is commercially satisfactory in terms of technical quality and song structure. Subjective is not. So if it's to the record label's subjective approval, the song has to be good enough for them to like it. I can never prove that. And even if they liked it, they can lie about it in court. So they can never let you out of the contract that way. You have to deliver these things. I have to deliver an album that is hopefully just commercially satisfactory. And even lower standard is technically satisfactory. And that just means you can hear it. And then another important thing is, obviously what they're going to give you in return. And a super important factor for independent or whoever artists to think about, big artists, is what they're saying they're going to give you, is what they told you over cocktails or over a cup of coffee that they were going to give you, is that actually in black and white in the contract? Because if it's not something that they're going to, probably something they're going to give you, or B, they're certainly not legally bound to give you that. So you're agreeing to legally be bound to give them an album. But if they told you, I'm going to give you $10,000 to cover your recording costs, and it's not in the contract, then you still have to give them the album, but they don't have to give you the $10,000. So what they're giving you, what you're giving them, how long it's going to take, and obviously the shorter the period of time, the better. 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, especially if you're young. And even then, if there are options, if say a contract has 2, 3, 4 options, I would say, let's cut that back to one option. Because by the way, if your album has done well or your EP has done well, meaning garnered a lot of streams, they're not going to want to let you go, and you'll have much stronger bargaining power on that second negotiation.
You've laid out a lot of different options and a lot of different scenarios here for us, both from the attorney side and from the artist side. And I'm curious, what, in your opinion, are the greatest challenges you face today in representing musical acts?
I think money is always a big challenge, and having resources to do the things we want to do that we're planning on doing is a big challenge. And so I represent a lot of people who are putting their heart and soul and lifeblood and everything into it, but you still do need some money to to fund these things, to market them. You can do a lot now with social media without the money. You can do, and people who are smart are learning how to do well without paying for our advertising or marketing, but money is still kind of important. And I know a bunch of people who could do a lot if they had a little bit of financing, and that's kind of the downside of the labels not being as involved as they once were, because they were more of a source of, we're going to put some money behind this and tour support and get acts on the road. I feel like a lot of people are kind of hamstrung. They would love to be touring. They would love to be shooting music videos, but they're having to work day jobs to do it. There's just a lot of artists out there now too. So a challenge is that it's hard to be heard above the noise on some level, and I think that in a sense, because there are so many companies now, independent companies, it's a little bit like the Wild West in terms of contracts for the independent companies. And it's hard to know what is actually even the standard for certain, relationships like sync licensing or even releasing recorded music. So those are some of the challenges. Getting on the radio is next to impossible. So I guess if you count like possible, that'd be like impossible is a challenge, then that would be a challenge too. But those are some of them, yeah. And getting heard by major labels is, and getting a traction with a major label is very, very difficult.
You referenced Don Passman's book quite a bit during our conversation, and I'm curious for our listeners out there, are there any other specific books that you can recommend artists should be reading? Absolutely,
yes. There's a book called I'm looking at it now, The Guide to Music Publishing. The Plain and Simple Guide to Music Publishing by Randall Wixson.
Yeah, it's a brilliant book. Easy to read, easy to understand.
And he's kind of the great music publishing administrator. So you learn about the difference between administrating publishing rights and, the kind of things that Sony, ATV, and the big publishing companies do, where they're putting writers in the same room and all that kind of really cool stuff. They're two totally different functions in some ways.
Yeah, I believe he handled the administration for Tom Petty's catalog. And
he sued Spotify. I don't know if that's still going on behalf of like Neil Young, I think, and people like that. And so he's really a fascinating guy. I'm looking at a book called What They'll Never Tell You About the Music Business by Peter Thal. I've gone to that less than some of the others, but there's good information in that. Ari Herstand's blog is amazing online. He's a very good guy. He's very accessible. He's talking at things around the country all the time. And he's kind of living in the same world I am, in that independent music world. It's called Ari's Take online. There's a good book called The Music Copyright Manual, which is also very easy to read. It's written by a music lawyer named Jim Jesse, Jesse. And I like the things, and there's a kind of theme here that I really like the things that are accessible, even for me, the things that are easy to understand. And easy to, and aren't trying to overcomplicate things, but are trying to simplify. And that's actually something I try to do with the contracts I write. And if I don't write them, the points in a contract I try to negotiate, I try to make it in a language that's clear, understandable. And people think I'm doing that just for my clients to be able to understand it. But because I have a background in trial law, the real reason I'm doing it is because I've actually done trials about contracts. And what I learned in doing that, when the adrenaline's flowing and you're in an adversarial situation in a courtroom, the last thing you want is any kind of ambiguity in the language. If you're trying to make a point about what the language is supposed to mean, like they're supposed to pay me $100,000 if I do X, Y, or Z. Well, some of the old record contracts are really complicated, confusing. So I try to break it down. When I first started doing this, Ritch, I remember looking at just standard music recording contracts, and I didn't see the word digital. And I actually asked Don Passman, I said, am I reading the wrong contracts, or are these contracts not talking about digital? And he's like, they're not talking about digital. And they're not there. It was kind of caught up in miscellaneous, like a miscellaneous income stream, which is why I think a lot of the older artists were really behind the eight ball when it came to streaming, because it wasn't even as important as it became. It became very important very quickly. There wasn't even a separate clause in some of these contracts to deal with, streaming music income. And now that's changed, and it's obviously much more prevalent. But it's all about can I go in and convince a judge or a jury, that these words mean I should be paid. And if they can't understand it, I've actually seen it with my own eyes. They'll kind of throw their hands up and split the baby. I don't know what that means. So it's an important thing to have, I think, is clarity and easy to understand.
What pieces of advice do you have for artists who are interested in pursuing a career as either a recording artist or a professional songwriter?
Great question. As a songwriter, I think go meet other songwriters. Don't work in a bubble. Find other people. Even John Lennon and Paul McCartney wrote together. Don't feel. I've met some people work amazingly well alone, and God bless them. Excellent. If you're Joni Mitchell and you can write an incredible song by yourself, then more power to you. But a lot of people find it very, very, I think, enriching as a songwriter to write with other people. And everyone has strengths and weaknesses. And if you learn from other people's strengths and try to shore up your weaknesses, it's only going to make you a better songwriter. So write as many songs. Write 2-3 songs a day. Write. Find other songwriters and write with them. And then I think if you do that, I'm a big believer in just getting to be as good as you can be at what you're doing, at your craft, and then good things will happen. You'll start to meet people. People will start to want to record your songs. And then that's a very organic way to go. If you're in the middle of someplace, in the middle of a rural area where there aren't people around, you can still do it online. You can network with people online. You can do co-writing sessions through Skype or something. You can find a community of songwriters. In terms of recording artists, it's a similar idea. It's that I just think getting to be as good as you can at it is an important thing. And that, for me, that goes hand in hand with being as true to yourself, finding your own voice as you can be. So, there are exercises you can do where you think, if I was a superhero, which superhero would I be? If I was a character from history, what would it be? And then really looking at your life as an artist from that lens of that iconic figure. Because if you look at people who are really huge in music, 9 times out of 10, they're bigger than life. They're Lady Gaga. They're, Snoop Dogg, or there's somebody who's just, bigger than life in terms of a persona, in terms of a public brand, in terms of a point of view. And it's about accessing that and just owning it and running with it hard and fast and as far and as often as you can.
Ned, want to ask you, how do our listeners reach you?
I'm on the web at www.eem-law.com. That's Edward Mary law.com. They can call my number, which is 844-368-2889. And I'm at Ned Menoyo, one word, NEDMENOYO, at EEMLawPC, one word, .com.
Beautiful. All right. Thank you so much. I appreciate this. I appreciate this immensely.
Yeah, thanks so much, Ned, for joining us today.
It's my pleasure, and you're doing great work, Rich, and everyone should know about what you're doing. I call you the keeper of the lists, the guy who knows everybody.
Yeah, we call him the Oracle over here, from like the Matrix, the Oracle.
Yeah, you've always been so supportive of what I'm doing, and I know other people feel the same way about you, but thank you so much for everything you've done for me, and appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Ned. I really appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Really interesting conversation, I thought. This is like the legal elements of contracts and agreements and the role of the attorney. I thought that was the most interesting thing, when he talked about when do you need an attorney, and his view, of course, which I understand, is that you need the attorney first. You need the attorney as an integral part of building your team. Yeah.
And I thought what he said was that bands and artists wait too long for that.
Yeah.
They're already getting things presented to themselves and they're not seeking counsel. And I think those are, obviously very important. And I thought the biggest thing, which really kind of changed my thinking about it when he presented it that way, was that the lawyer has a fiduciary duty to,
absolutely,
to put their, to put your interest before theirs.
Yes.
Unlike a manager or any other person in any role that you're playing in the team. So I think that that's really the way he posed that to me was really good. And I look at that from a different place, because typically the artist would be the first thing is, let me get a manager. I need a manager.
Right.
And so he kind of brought an interesting case, I thought, that I thought made a lot of sense and carried a lot of weight with getting an attorney first.
Absolutely. And that the attorney can perhaps help you if you're getting a manager in terms of that agreement with the manager. This is a very, very important point. It may sound, insignificant or trivial, but it's not. The group Migos,
right?
It's a very, very big act right now, is literally in the middle of this because they had their record company tell them, negotiate the deal for management and the label with the same attorney as they used.
Which is a complete conflict of interest. That's like,
whose interests are being
that's
represented?
Lawyer 101,
Yes. And yet they did that. The agreement that they made with their manager and their label, which is the one and the same, they use the same attorney,
right, which is the biggest no-no in the history of the music industry.
Of course you don't do that. Whose interest are you representing? And it's more than just obvious, Eric, because this is something that for years I've been hearing about this. When you look at some of these gigantic law firms, it's even come up in more subtler ways. They represent you. How hard do they push?
Right.
Because they don't want the next negotiation to go south for them because they were really difficult on this one. Or they also represent the record company or have in the past and would like to continue that kind of business in a totally unrelated matter.
Yeah.
So whose interests are really being represented?
Exactly.
And it's a very hard thing. It's a very incestuous relationship.
So bands and artists that are listening, first thing you find out is make sure that whoever you're doing business with and you have an attorney, make sure that that other person that you're about to do business with doesn't have the same attorney.
Absolutely. Or relationships with them, or isn't representing something that may conflict with your interests.
Talk about not doing a fiduciary duty or service to themselves. And I think the other good point that he brought was that they're the cheapest percentage, the lawyers, at 5%.
Right.
So, it's something to really think about to our listeners out there that I think is a really valid point that he brought up, even before even thinking about a manager or something that you might want to think about an attorney.
Precisely. And The other thing that I thought was so interesting was when he talked about that when we were asking that question about, building a career independently, and he talked about that he really felt that today it really depended on, do I go with a label? Do I not? On the goals that you have as an artist. Not every artist wants to be on a label.
Oh, in regards to pursuing whether to get on a label or not.
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly.
Some want to do it independently. Some don't. It depends on your goals. It depends on what kind of an artist you are. And it depends on, where you're at in your career and what you're willing to do. I mean, we can look at more than one situation with that. Something like, I guess, along the lines of, I'm more of a troubadour type act or a singer-songwriter.
Exactly.
I'm just going to be performing in clubs. Do I really need a label right now? It's great to have one.
But that usually comes later on in an artist's career.
Exactly.
And also that it's not the only way and the only path to go. He illustrated the point about Katy Perry that, if you want to become the next Katy Perry, then yes, you're going to need a label.
A major label.
A major label, because you need that apparatus that's going to...
And marketing muscle and financial backing.
Exactly, and the radio support and touring support and on and on and on. So, and I thought that was a really, really valid point. The other thing that I thought was regarding avoidable mistakes and, seeing things as a binary option where artists will just see something and they're like, okay, no, I'm not going to do the deal, and they walk away from it, as opposed to coming in there and saying, well, how can we negotiate this, and that everything is negotiable.
Exactly, and not realizing that, like being offered a contract and thinking there's no negotiation, you just take it or leave it.
Exactly.
The world of business and contracts doesn't work
that way. Right.
Not that you can always get everything you want,
right,
but it is a negotiation.
Exactly. And he talked about just not to just say no, but also, on the flip side, saying yes to a bad contract, which happens a lot.
Which, it's not something you need to be doing.
Right.
Just one more thing on the building a career independently. There's also so many situations, and I think probably the greatest one we can think of that comes to the top of mind with this, as to whether to go with a label or not, are those who have almost done it in spite of themselves. Joe Bonamassa. You may know of him, you may not know of him. He is a very, very, very successful artist. You may have heard of him. He's somebody who tried to get signed, couldn't get signed, and decided to go independent because he was willing to put the music out himself, and built his career from like a couple hundred followers to a few million, and now tours the world and makes a very, very, very good living.
And owns the entire thing. Yeah,
absolutely.
He walls his shows, owns shows. I mean, everything.
And he has a viable audience for what he does. Now, he's done that independently. He's probably one of the great examples of someone like that. In another era, it was Dave Matthews, who really built a very successful career touring.
Ani DeFranco,
even before Dave Matthews. But, when you look at these people who did that, they came from, the difference was that they came from a position, like what you were saying about everything's negotiable. Dave Matthews Band came from a position of strength. When it was like, do you want to sign us? Do you not? I mean, we don't need the money. We've put out an LP and an EP. We have an audience. We have a touring base that we've spent several years building. So that's a very, very important distinction, I think, in that particular regard, and always to keep that in mind.
Yeah, and one of the other crucial things was talking about the crucial elements in a contract that he felt were important. And
he thought there were a few.
Right, and one of the biggest was the length of a contract, which I think is really, really huge. As an artist, you want to get that as low as you possibly can. Obviously, the label wants the longest period that they can possibly get, but you want to try to bring that down to the lowest possible length of time.
Which is 7 years in California.
Right.
In Tennessee and New York, those are the three states, California, Tennessee, and New York, those are the three states where the majority of recording or publishing agreements, which are what are called personal service agreements, that's the majority of where those are written. In New York and Tennessee, you don't have that provision.
Exactly. And I think some of the other points that he brought up was what you're required to give the label, the deliverables.
An album, an EP, a live EP, remixes, greatest hits. I mean, this is all the amount of product and what is that product?
Right. And at what level of the recordings need to be, commercially viable. But
Yes.
what does that mean? And it's got to be radio ready. And,
And what is that?
Exactly.
What is that? The most famous case of that particular element in a contract who was when David Geffen sued Neil Young
Right.
for not being commercial.
Right.
And to David's credit, years later, in like 1990, he said it was one of the great regrets of his professional career that he did that. He said, I took bad advice. My general counsel advised me to sue him on that basis. I went ahead and did it, and I really regretted it. It destroyed his relationship at the time with Neil Young and created a real problem. And he had known Neil Young for a long, long time. I mean, since Crosby, Stills and Nash, which was
Right.
68,
Did they ever
69.
recover from that?
He left the label after that and went to Warner Brothers. But, it's to David's credit that he would admit, I was terribly wrong. It was a terrible mistake to do that.
Right.
But I'm bringing this up only because that was the reason that
Right.
his
The
music
exact
wasn't
reason.
commercially viable. Well, what
Right.
does that mean? How can you guarantee that?
Yeah. And the other point that he brought up was, what they give in return. And is it in the actual contract? I think he referred to it in the story that, you're having drinks with the label or whatever, and they're telling you these things, but is it on that paper?
Very important.
Right.
What they're telling you, are they willing to put it in writing? Or, look, we'll support the album with $50,000 in marketing. Are they willing to commit? We will support the album with $50,000 in marketing, and this is how it will be spent, or whatever, just committing to a dollar figure. Very important, so that what is said is committed to in writing. That's all they're saying.
Exactly.
And that's very important because people can tell you, you're obligated to give the record. You're obligated to put it out. But what are they obligated? Well, you told me, but if it's
Exactly.
not in writing, then they're not obligated to do it. Well, sorry, Eric, we don't have the money, or we don't think that that's really the right thing to do at this time. That's what contracts are for, so that what is said and everybody has a clear understanding of what's expected on their part and what's expected on your part. So there's no misunderstanding.
And I think the bottom line that, we can't stress enough is anything that gets presented to you, get an attorney.
Always get an attorney who represents your interest. Get a music attorney.
Exactly.
A music attorney, not an entertainment attorney who does TV and film.
Not a personal injury attorney.
But a music attorney who really understands music law. That's absolutely crucial.
Hey Insiders, thanks so much for tuning into this episode. We really appreciate it. To get show notes, links, and everything that was mentioned during this interview, head on over to our official website at MUBUTV.com/podcast/show notes. If you're enjoying the content and what we're doing here on the show, please subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcast, Stitcher, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts from. And don't forget to rate and review our show over at iTunes. 5-star reviews are always welcome and help to ensure that our podcast stands out on the top-rated and new and noteworthy charts on iTunes in our space. You can also find us on social media at Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, all ending with the handle MUBUTV, which is spelled MUBUTV. Don't forget to catch our flagship show, the MUBUTV Insider Video Series, airing every week on YouTube at youtube.com/MUBUTV. This show was produced and created by Ritch, Esra, and Eric Knight. This show would not be here if it weren't for our amazing team, which are the following: interview editors Sarah Nissenbaum and Alex Taylor, show notes and transcriptions by Jani Chang, Nicole Capodoglo, Lilia Owens, and Sarah Nissenbaum, theme music by Disciples of Babylon, and be sure to tune in next week for another episode of the MUBUTV Insider Podcast.